Hello, good morning. We are here for a new podcast of Beyond Grants. And today we have Rubayat Khan, Director of Health Programs, Endless. Rubayat, can you please introduce yourself and your organization?
Thank you, Claudia, for having me. My name is Rubayat Khan. I'm originally Bangladeshi, currently living in Baltimore. And I have been primarily a builder and innovator for my entire career. I started a couple of health tech social enterprises based out of Bangladesh, worked across Asia, Africa, and Central America for about 15 years. And then about a couple of years ago, I moved to the US and joined Endless Network, which actually was one of my investors earlier as I was building these ventures. And they offered me a position to lead their global health work. So I never really planned to be on the funding side, but almost by accident and serendipity, I ended up here. Um, but I found out that I initially was not sure that this was the right fit for me. But over time, I've realized that for a builder and entrepreneur like myself who has that field experience, it actually is quite a blessing to be on the funding side. And it actually is a good synergy because I can bring some of that perspective to my brand making and to supporting the ventures that I'm working with now.
Great. So let's start with the question. You have built companies that actually reach scale in some of the hardest markets in the world. When you look at the development sector current conversation about earned revenue and financial stability, what's your honest reaction? Are people asking the right questions?
Um, So I obviously empathize a lot with folks in the development sector right now. Of course, with the collapse of USAID, there are real costs to human lives here. I've had friends who have had to, whose jobs disappeared, who had to uproot their families and move elsewhere. I think there was an estimate in the Lancet that 30 million additional lives will be lost as a result of these funding cuts. So I don't want to downplay the costs at all. But at the same time, I think in response to these funding cuts, and it is obviously not just USAID, right? Like ODA is collapsing in front of us across the world. Um, I think the question that most people seem to be asking organically is how do we replace USAID funding? Will philanthropy step in? That's been the primary narrative. Whereas I think if we zoom out a little bit, the question that we should probably be asking is, what would we have built if grants didn't exist in the first place, right? And I think that's where, and to be honest, that's been part of my career journey as well. I started off a venture that started becoming too dependent on grants. And then I moved to another venture because I realized that there was a lot of things broken with the development system as we had built it. Not the least of which is the colonial mentality that prevails. Of course, there's an entire decolonization movement that was happening. Um, there was the vertical funding silos that was causing fragmentation of services. There was very little people-centered thinking in the space. So overall, I would say that there was a lot of things that were broken. And if you really kind of shifted perspectives and thought about how you would have redesigned development differently if grants did not exist, I think that would be a better question to ask at this point.
Very good. At Gion, you built a network of over 35,000 pharmacists and drug seller in rural Bangladesh. That's a commercial distribution model. That's not just a program. What made you decide to build that way? And what would the same initiative have looked like if it had been designed as a traditional NGO project?
Um, Gosh, that's a uh, I hope I don't go too long with that answer. So I think my realization from the first phase of my career when I was building a venture that was primarily working with governments and large NGO donor-funded projects was that there's this fundamental disconnect between um, people-centered thinking and treating someone as your beneficiary, right? So if you think of clients in the development sector as beneficiaries, um, you have an inherent power dynamic where you are superior to them. Uh, you are doing what's best for them. They don't have a voice. You are designing the services without consultation often, and it's very top down, um, and often patronizing, to be very honest, right? Um, if you instead view clients as clients or customers, that entire conversation shifts completely. Because if you have ever built a business in, even for poor people, uh, the customers are the king. They are going to pay your salaries. They are going to buy your product or reject your product, and that's going to determine the success or failure of your business. And so there's actually a very significant difference in how you approach clients in that case. So my realization from that first phase actually led to the creation of Geon, because just to zoom out a little bit, in Bangladesh, about 70% of all healthcare interactions happen at local pharmacies and drug shops. And I was really wondering at that point in time in my career that we've spent billions of dollars in propping up the formal healthcare system, the public system, the nonprofits. BRAC has 70,000 health workers across the country. Why are so many people still going to the informal sector of drug shops and pharmacies for the vast majority of their care needs? Uh, and when I really dug deeper into it, that's when I realized that the relationship between pharmacies and clients are very, very different. It's much more symbiotic, much more respectful, much less patronizing, much more people-centered, to be very honest. Even when the pharmacies themselves are not well qualified to provide those services, they're actually very people-centered in their thinking. So that's what led me to realize that if we were to change the healthcare sector in Bangladesh, you had to start where the footfalls were. You had to start where people were already going, and with completely ignoring it, as we had been doing in our health system strategy and design, we were doing a disservice to populations and people. So that is what ultimately led me to design this as a social enterprise, which was a for-profit business. We raised commercial capital for it. Actually, impact-oriented capital would be a better way of characterizing it. But it actually eliminated a lot of the top-down thinking, because we had to figure out how to get people to pay for our services. And that's how the system and the services that we develop were, I believe, much more people-centered in their orientation.
Very good. So you raised from USAID, Unilever, and the Dahlia Foundation. This is a very different mix of funders. In practice, what
Mhm.
did each type of funder actually want from you? And where did you those expectations create tension, real tension?
Mhm. Um, to be honest, Geon actually never made it past the innovation phase and into a scale phase, if you would like call going to millions and millions of people. The only time we actually reached any meaningful national level scale was during the COVID pandemic, which was still a very, very philanthropic approach to addressing the immediate crisis that we had. So none of the commercial models that we had built actually made it that far. So the kind of funding that we were raising from USAID, Unilever, and the Dahlia Foundation were all kind of catalytic innovation-oriented capital. Even though it was coming from USAID, it came from the Development Innovation Ventures, DIV program, which had three phases. The first phase was all kind of catalytic innovation grants. Of course, the timelines, the level of bureaucracy, the delays in processing, all of that was very different between these different players. Unilever was much more kind of aggressive in their timelines, as you would expect. Dahlia Foundation was very responsive, being a smaller foundation that and a family-based foundation, not an institutional foundation. They were much more responsive to my individual needs and preferences, and how they adapted their approach to me in many ways. And the kinds of capital that we had, we actually got, even though Dali Foundation typically does grants, we actually structured our investment as a safe grant, as a safe note. So that's how it was different. But USAID, Unilever, and Dahlia were all actually supporting the innovation process itself. So fundamentally, there was no major conflicts.
I see. Okay, Rubayat, I want to provoke you a little bit. So there's a belief
Mhm.
in the NGO world that commercial models compromise mission. That once you start selling, you serve customers who can pay, and then you abandon those who can't. You have operated at the bottom, really, of the pyramid for 15 years. Is that belief correct?
I'm normally the provocateur, so I'm not used to getting provoked, but that is a very provocative question. I would say that the goal, ultimately, the mission should dictate the model, right? So if you are doing humanitarian work in a refugee camp, you cannot expect to have a for-profit commercial business, and that would completely compromise the mission. But if you were building a service for a market, let's say even rural Bangladesh, aside from maybe the bottom 5 to 10% of the population who are destitute, maybe widowed women, elderly women who live alone, except for populations like that, the vast majority of the population has some ability to pay. And the proof of that is the pharmacy network that we have built, and which exists in Bangladesh. There are 200,000 pharmacies where about 20 people show up on average to each pharmacy every day. So that's 4 million people, 4 million visits to pharmacies every single day. And each of those people are actually coming with cash in their pocket for the services, because pharmacies don't provide anything free of cost. So people actually can pay for a good quality service. Unfortunately, they pay, but they don't get good quality service, right? So my provocation back to those provocateurs would be to say that, have you even asked the question to your clients, like what do they actually want and need? And how much are they willing to pay for it? Because this reminds me of this story. Once I was working with a large nonprofit, very well known. I won't name them, but I was building designing a large $80 million Feed the Future project with them. It was a USAID grant funded project, and it was agriculture and livelihoods oriented. And there was this consultant who flew in from DC to Bangladesh to help us write the grant proposal. And I had actually designed an elaborate plan for that entire project to become self-sustaining in 5 years' time, by the time the grant project ended. When I told them that this could become a self-sustaining program, they said that they don't have the processes to manage revenue. And therefore, that entire part, the sustainability part, was completely scrapped from the proposal. So that's what I mean, right? An $80 million investment that USAID made in that project could have had impact 20 years down, but unfortunately they wrapped up and left after the money ended. And there was a complete plan behind it. I don't know if that plan would have worked, but at least we could have tried. So I feel like we use that as a crutch to say that commercial models compromise mission. We haven't even tried. And there are good examples out there who are very mission-oriented organizations. M-Pharma in Africa is one. SwiperX in Indonesia is one. So there are models out there who have done this successfully. Um, Dimagi is one. Empower, my own organization, is one. It's still a self-sustaining organization. So there are actually models out there. BRAC, the largest NGO in the world, they make 80% of their revenue of their budget from earned revenue. Right? It's almost $1 billion budget, and they're earning $800 million from earned revenue. So that tells you that this is possible. We just haven't tried hard enough.
Yes, indeed. So let's talk about Empower, which spun out three venture, including Geon. Now, most NGOs struggle to incubate anything commercial or even think about anything commercial. What's the actual organizational reason that spinning out a revenue generating venture is so hard for a traditional development organization?
Because that's not what they're designed to do, right? They're designed to apply for grants, get the grant, run the program, do the compliance, wrap up, move on, right? Um, Empower was designed with a very different vision. When we started, of course, things evolved over time, but we believed that fundamentally the technology had transformative potential in emerging markets. At that time, the first smartphones were coming to market, and we were thinking, how do we apply this new superpower that we have to decentralize care, to make sure that services are more widely available? And over time, of course, we had to, in order to sustain ourselves, we had to rely on grant-funded projects. We were kind of consultants to those projects, but we were still working under grant-funded projects as sub-awardees. But we realized that some of these, like the example that I shared from the earlier nonprofit, there were projects where there was potential to make them self-sustaining, but there was just no appetite from the NGOs themselves, the primes in those cases, to actually turn those into sustainable ventures, right? So the way we actually structured ourselves eventually was to have a front-facing arm that was more of this boutique consultancy that was supporting nonprofits with building technology-enabled models. But then based on the learnings from those projects, we were actually on the back end, we were actually an incubator, right? So we were taking some of those lessons and saying, how can we turn these into a commercial model or as a self-sustaining model that can spin out into its own venture? So it was kind of a two-part outfit. On the front-facing part, we were consulting for nonprofits. On the back end, we were actually spinning out ventures. So that was what we were designed to do, and that's what we were doing.
Very good. So now you are at a family foundation on the funding side. So when an organization comes to you with a plan to generate earned revenue or launch a new social enterprise, what do you look for? And what do most proposals get wrong?
We don't really entertain proposals in the traditional sense. So we don't do any unsolicited proposals from anyone. We have a very specific approach and thesis for the development sector, specifically the global health sector, and how we approach it. And based on that, we go out and look for the most aligned organizations that are already doing that work, and then try to fund them in a project that is of mutual interest. So we operate very differently from a traditional foundation. I think in most cases, the big question that we ask is, how is this going to scale and have impact at scale? And that is something that people often don't have a good answer to. Like they have a model that they're building, incubating, piloting within their organizational boundaries, but there's no plan to see, like they, in their optimistic entrepreneurial mindsets, they feel like they can scale it themselves. But the vast majority of startups, nonprofits, social enterprises don't really scale to millions of people, right? So one thing that we do look for is, how do these models scale? Is it a model that can be adapted by other people? Can we create like playbooks and knowledge resources that other people can adopt? Are there partnerships with governments that are possible? Are there partnerships with larger NGOs that are possible? Is there a commercial trajectory for scaling this venture? So those are all questions that we ask of new innovations that I don't think everybody typically asks, and also typically most people don't have answers to.
Okay, I would like to remain in this question of the business model. I saw that you
Mhm.
work in different countries, Bangladesh, Haiti, Egypt, Bhutan, and the Philippines. Does the business model question look different across countries, or is the core problem the same everywhere?
I think some parts are the same and some parts are different. So the part that is the same is, in order to build a business, you need to have a certain level of hunger for scale, for revenue, um, and you need to have a really um, single-minded focus on growth and sustainability, right? Um, to be very honest, I myself did not have that hunger for the most part of my career, and I have learned to build that hunger within myself because I grew up uh, in a middle class family that actually valued intelligence and career accomplishments more than like building a sustainable, successful business. Um, my family members had communists among them who had a very tortuous relationship with money, right? So it was difficult for me to overcome those barriers to start thinking about money as a good thing, about growth as a good thing, and to align that with the impact and the mission that I was seeking in the world. Um, so that has been my own personal journey. But that aside, I feel like that those parts are the same across successful entrepreneurs everywhere in the world. Um, whoever has built a successful, highly scaled business, they all have that characteristic in common. The part that is different is how you go about it in each context, because the context actually drives those differences. If you work in a market that has a mature insurance industry, for example, like that would lead to a very different kind of business model than if you were working in a largely out of pocket market. Um, so I would say that if you bring the right attitude and mindset to it, and then be open to and willing to kind of understand the context, spend time with your clients and customers, really deeply listen to them, and build iteratively. Like, don't get hung up on your product. Um, Products can change anytime. As long as you keep your focus on the mission, you can approach that from many different angles, right? So don't get hung up on the product. Really look at what the customers are seeking, and not just what they're saying in explicitly, but what do they mean underneath that. Sometimes what they say and what they mean are very different things. So I think really reading between those lines, and understanding and building an intuition for what would actually click in that market, that's really critical. And then based on what kind of product you're bringing to market, based on the kind of environment you're working within, the business model might look very different as well.
Okay, my last question and last chance to provoke. So, if you could give one piece of advice to an NGO executive who knows their grant funding is ending and is seriously considering something different, perhaps a commercial model, what would be your advice? And more, what is the one thing that they should not absolutely do? Something to avoid.
So the pivot for impact incubator, which is what brought us together, that's essentially the question that we were exploring with that, right? What is the next step for a nonprofit? And I think there are a few potential paths, as we have articulated in the incubator as well. One path, of course, is, and this is, we don't have time to get into this today, but based on the different characteristics that determine which path you need to take. But one path is mergers or acquisitions by a larger nonprofit, which has mission alignment with you, where you could be complementary to each other. That's kind of one path. One path is thinking about whether your model actually has anything that can be structured with an earned revenue business model. Um, and if so, thinking about pivoting to earned revenue, testing out different approaches, being iterative and agile about it, and building a sales function. So if you have to have earned revenue, you'll have to have a sales function, and you'll have to overcome this mindset that sales is a bad thing. Uh, Sales is good for impact if you align it with impact, right? Um, so that's kind of the second piece. And then the third piece is if you are working in an environment where there's just no possibility of earned revenue, even after thinking it through, trying many different things, then you have to absolutely entertain the question, do we sunset the organization? Because given the current funding landscape, philanthropy is not going to fill the gap left behind by ODA. Now, you could always remain like a tiny nonprofit that's reliant on philanthropic resources. In certain countries like India, it is actually sometimes more possible because there's a lot of CSR funding that's mandated by the government. Every business has to contribute, I think, 1 to 2% of their revenue to a CSR fund. So when those kinds of structures exist, there might be possibilities to stay alive as a small organization, and maybe create employment for 20, 100 people. But I think at some point you might also have to encounter the question, like, do you shut down the organization responsibly? Of course, you don't want to do that overnight. You want to give your employees enough time. You want to give your clients enough time to adjust, but have a ramp down and then exit responsibly. I think those are all potential options in front of nonprofits, and you need to, based on your context, your scale, and the kind of work that you're doing, you'll have to pick the right path for yourself.
And what is the one thing they should not do for their NGO?
I think the thing that is counterproductive is staying in denial and staying in a state of shock, right? Of course, there will be shock. There will be a period of grief that you have to go through. That's all part of the journey. But the sooner you can snap out of it as an entrepreneur, you have to fight fires. That's the nature of the job. And this is the biggest fire many of you have ever faced. And I think it's important to snap out of it and say, like, these are the three options. Let me evaluate them systematically. And whichever path turns out to be the best for the organization, let me accept it. Because ultimately, you'll have to accept that some of these things are beyond our control as well. The global political climate is not something any of us have any meaningful influence over. So there's no point lamenting and if my own journey is any example, right? Like my own business, my second business actually failed in very blank terms. Gion failed to build a commercial business that could scale. We spent all our resources during COVID trying to mitigate the pandemic, but then there was no path back to a sustainable commercial business. So we basically sunset the organization. We turned it into a tiny nonprofit. It still operates in a very small capacity, but I am no longer involved. But that actually created the opening for me to think, what is the next step in my career? And I actually, thankfully, I'm really deeply grateful for it. The current position that I'm in is actually far stronger than I've ever been in my career before. So, and I probably have much more impact than I could have had in just a Gion role, right? So I would say that this is not the end. If you are really deeply, if you care about your mission, you'll find other ways to get there. But go through your grief, but eventually start acting.
Very good. Rubayat, thank you so much for your insights and your candor for this discussion. And is there any last word you would like to give to the community of NGO professionals who are going to listen to this podcast?
No, I think I already mentioned what I had to mention. I think I deeply believe that ultimately, people like us who care about impact, who care about the world beyond our own well-being, our family's well-being, I think that's what drives progress and moves the world forward. So I deeply appreciate everyone who's in this work. Um, it's just that we have been in kind of a bubble that was largely created by the free flow of money that was coming from USAID, and it was not really always in full service of the people it was meant to serve. More than 50% of the money was getting stuck in the bureaucracy somewhere in DC, right? So those were all real problems that many of us have challenged, questioned, and worried about for a very long time. We've worried about decolonization. And this is actually now, although I wouldn't have had it this way, this is actually an opportunity, right? It is a crisis, but every crisis is inherently an opportunity as well. And so I really deeply believe that there is a tremendous opportunity in this crisis to completely reimagine and rebuild development the way it should always have been. And I deeply believe that it is this community of people that have been doing this work and deeply care about this mission that's going to drive that forward. So I look forward to seeing what that looks like.
Great. Thank you, Rubayat.